So just a few words kind of here to tie things up here in our last class about spaciousness. I think as I'm ending this, and one thing that really stands out for me is how, when you're doing pure Vipassana meditation, you sort of just notice whatever arises, right? And so whatever state of mind is present, you notice that. And the state of mind changes and you watch it change and so forth. But there's also a completely legitimate way of practicing where you invite, it's more traditionally called arouse, a state of mind. But I like invite because it's less aggressive in a certain way. Something about it where by sometimes just inviting a state of mind, you can move toward it easily. It doesn't feel forceful. And if it's not possible in that moment, it's just fine. So I will sometimes mention things along those lines in the course of the meditation. You notice tonight, enjoyment was one that I mentioned. And it's a frequent one that I invoke because it's often available to people, but without the word being used, without the invitation, sometimes you don't just quite slip into it. You don't quite let it happen. And we can be kind of locked into this mindset of meditation as effort and it's work, and we're trying to do something and clamp down in a certain way. And that clamping down is completely unnecessary. And enjoyment just kind of invites you to do that. And so much of spaciousness, so much of a spacious quality of mind, I think involves inviting qualities of mind that are spacious, that feel open and alive. And so just to mention some of them, awe is a wonderful sort of feeling. And I invoke that a little bit in this meditation, you may have noticed. We so easily take for granted this awake experience we're having, as if it were like, just a living, And it's not. It's totally miraculous to be awake in this moment, to be a body, to have all of these bodily sensations and have this thing run in itself pretty much. We kind of say I about it, and I and me about the body, but it kind of runs itself, which is pretty remarkable. The breath runs itself. You can take it over and direct it, but otherwise it runs itself. The heart runs itself. The heating element runs itself. The digestion runs itself. All of this stuff. And so that's just one possibility of the body. I know at times I've invited you in this class to step outside, look at the sky, look at the stars. And in part, that is to try to kind of like widen the scope out of the kind of narrowness that we get locked into so easily, to kind of widen the scope. And there's a feeling to that. Awe might not be a bad word to describe what's possible. Awe and wonder kind of is a synonym of that. Sometimes in these courses, I use the word curiosity. I haven't used that so much in this course, but that certainly opens the aperture a bit when one is curious. Anything that evokes gratitude, the sense that so much is given in our experience, and we just receive. Even just the knowing of the body, even just the knowing of the body is something given and not to be taken for granted. It won't always be there. And the workings of the mind. So a lot, I think, of spaciousness is this inviting of states that are spacious. And kind of finding a larger context, our thinking minds get kind of locked into this sort of more narrow frame of reference, which is, what do I need to get done? Whether it's, doing tasks or talking to someone, or even, kind of talking that's about friends talking to each other. We so easily kind of get into telling my story, telling your story, what happened with this and this. And there's kind of a closing in. So a lot of spaciousness is like widening the context. Again, just to have a conversation with someone with a sense of presence and awe at this other human being is wonderful. And then to hold our lives in a bigger context of space and time. It's a big reason why I like to step out on the deck at night and look at the stars. It reminds me of how small I am. It reminds me of how vast this universe is. And isn't it kind of cool that we can look out into it at night and see things that are a couple of billion light years away? The Andromeda galaxy can be seen with the naked eye. It's hard. You have to know exactly where it is. And even then, it's just kind of a cloud, a little tiny cloud of light. But that's 2 billion years away, light years away. So that's a larger context, just of kind of the space we're in. And time, sometimes you can make time present. I know once on a trip to the Grand Canyon, it was present in the layers of the earth that I hiked down through, very concretely, like how old this planet is and how many ages it's been through. You don't always have quite such a concrete presence in that way. Sometimes you have to do it in your imagination. But, the oodles of time that it has taken to create this human animal, not to mention all the other animals, not to mention all the plants who have been evolving just as long as animals have, sometimes tend to look down at them somehow as inferior. But I think that's mostly our inability to step into the experience of a plant. They have evolved as long as we have, and there are amazing beings and incredible chemists. So, that can be helpful too. Just the broader viewpoint. We go to the ocean, we go to the mountaintop, we go to the desert, precisely because we get these kind of vast views. And they're kind of places of revelation for that reason. So you can manipulate this somewhat by where you go, but you can manipulate it internally by what you invite, by the states that you invite to be present. You invite spaciousness of a certain sort. So we talked about some techniques too that are really helpful for breaking this stream of conditioning that we tend to get locked into. So the practice of mindfulness is the most basic, and one that I've been teaching for years now, of just noticing what's present when it's present. But it's hard to get there. And so we talked about just cultivating this ability to pause in the midst of life. And I know some people put up signs to actually stop for a moment and just be. Recalibrate and rest. Have a moment where you're not moving toward anything. When you're not moving toward anything, you're just with being, and there's a spaciousness about that. It's really remarkable. And it's also remarkable to me that can be known in an instant. It doesn't take that you have to go off on a retreat for days to access that. Just stopping for a moment and being, you're there. Whether that's stopping for a moment as you're at the dish sink and just breathing, feeling your body, staring out the window, feeling the water, or being at your desk, stopping, looking out the window, feeling the body. Or when you walk out the door, one of my favorite, just feel the change in temperature and smell the air. So simple. Feel the ground under you as you're walking. So easy to walk and just be in our heads. So to take a moment to just feel the walking. That sort of pause is priceless. All of that brings spaciousness. And I also mentioned, briefly, but it's worth re-mentioning just kind of here at the end, that there's sometimes a need for fierceness, virya, which is related to, the word for young man in Sanskrit, the root vir, which is the same as Latin, vir, and goes with warrior, virbhadra. And it's an attitude of like fierceness that sometimes it takes a strong energy to break through, a strong determination. If you're really going to establish presence and a spacious presence in your life, it takes a certain amount of determination to do that. We're often a little too lackadaisical. And I'm a kind of a yin guy, I'm not somebody who's, driving you. But once in a while, you really have to set a certain limit with yourself. So we talked about space just in our meditation. And a way of noticing that is to notice the volume of the body, really simple way. And begin to train ourselves to not just notice form, which is those sensations of pressure and tingling and pulsing, vibrating, and to notice the formless, which is always with us, that formless space of knowing, which we are, which we call awareness. The formless space is just as important to notice as form. And they go right in hand. In some sense, you can't really separate them. They're hand in hand, but you can look at one aspect and then the other. And so when you start to notice awareness itself, you start to notice the kind of field of knowing that you are, this place where everything happens. It just naturally creates a spaciousness in the mind. It naturally creates the ability to be spacious. Form sometimes traps us. And the same way with thoughts, thoughts are always arising. And in our meditation, we notice thoughts. We notice the fact that we're thinking, release that, and we go back to breathing. But sometimes it's nice to just contemplate a thought and notice how when you notice a thought, it kind of evaporates. What is a thought? And honestly, I don't know after years of meditating and watching thoughts. They're kind of mysterious little critters in there. The way that they come together, there's pictures involved, there's words involved, and there's thinking happening. It's this action, thinking, making these connections. And yet those are forms, those are thought forms in a space of noticing. And so when you notice thinking, suddenly you go from being locked up in the thought to being the space that notices the thought. And as you become the space that notices the thoughts tend to just kind of, just crumble, just fall apart. It's hard to have a thought continue once you step out of it to notice it. And we talked too a bit about not knowing as an attitude. That really is conducive to spaciousness, that oftentimes we get caught in a lot of mind traps around our views and opinions because they get sticky with the sense of knowing. I know, And it's helpful to learn to soften that. Do you really know? You can actually ask this question. Do I really know how things should be? Do I really know this is bad? I know why I think it's bad, but in the greater scheme of things, is it bad? I've had so many bad things happen to me in life. You know what I mean? But with some of them, it's hard to know, because the bad things that happened to me were formative of who I am. They're formative of my ability to help people and to be sympathetic to people. So it's hard for me always to say, yes, I know they're bad. But I ask the question, do I really know? Yes, they were painful. Yes, they were not ones I wanted to have happen. Yes, it took some recovering from them. And there was a lot of distress. And in some cases, maybe I'm never going to quite recover something that I lost in that. But nonetheless, it's very hard to say those shouldn't have happened, or they were entirely bad. So I just invite you to use that when the mind gets locked into it. It's not an invitation to have no opinions. As far as I can see, if that's no problem, we have a good, but we're going to have opinions. I'm not worried about that. I'm not worried about your minds all turned to mush around what you think and what you believe and so forth. But this skill of holding those in a certain way, not being too attached to them, and creating an ability to just step back into not knowing, really, really handy, and create spaciousness. And then also, finally, I just did some work with you around the heart space, which I think it's different than the head. And I think we'll probably be talking about it somewhat more in the next series than we did in this one. Of kind of opening that up as an area in the body deliberately, and noticing the feelings that are there, and noticing how it is energetically. Our culture doesn't encourage this much. Our education is mostly about concepts. It's mostly about thinking. And so it takes some deliberate work, it takes some deliberate effort to awaken this area and to begin to listen with this, to see with the eyes of the heart, to feel with the heart, to speak from the heart. All those things. And yet that is truly a space of spaciousness, truly a space of allowing, and a space of wisdom, emotional wisdom, and the wisdom to be with things. So, we touched on that in the last class. There's a lot more to be said. So that's, I think, the territory we covered. I'm sure I must have left out some things, just what I could recall. But you can perhaps come back to this talk when you feel like you need some spaciousness, and you need to kind of know what the toolkit is. I kind of gave you some of what's in the toolkit. All right, so I'd like to just open it up now and chat with you.